Somehow, it's been 5 years since the Siege toy line was released and ushered in the current era of chug slop we all know and consume like good little piggies. In it, we saw new Cybertronian versions of all our favorite characters, including Megatron, who I've reviewed previously. For Earthrise, the following toy line, Hasbro attempted to retool many of the figures they released in the year prior into new, more recognizable Earth alternate modes. Megatron was one of those who got the retooled treatment, and I have to say I was quite disappointed. He just didn't look different enough for me to warrant buying him. But then they gave him a G2 repaint. Welcome to Kit Katastrophe. My name is Kit, and today we'll be taking a look at Transformers Selects Voyager Class Megatron. This figure was released in 2020 and is a repaint of Earthrise Megatron, who is himself a retool of Siege Megatron. This video is brought to you in part by ToyHacks.com, your one-stop shop for Transformers upgrade stickers and more, and I've already made a stunning sticker sheet for this figure. Use the promo code WAVELENGTH before April ends to earn 15% off your next order, and check out my community tab to find the latest promo codes. Using the code supports the channel. I really do tire of Megatron turning into a tank of some variety ad nauseum, but if it's happening regardless, the tank mode might as well be good. And yeah, it's pretty alright. Earthrise, and by extension Selects, does a decent job giving Megatron a suitably hench alternate mode. Getting comparisons out of the way, the retooling job converts Megatron from a standard H-tank affair we've seen time and time again, even on Megatrons, to something a fair bit more grounded and suitable for an Earthling environment. Well, at least as grounded as a bright green and purple tank can be, I suppose. You see, it was the style at the time. Despite transforming exactly the same as Siege Megatron did, Selects Megatron's treads are sculpted to be one single unit on each side, which is something oddly rare in Transformers. More often than not, it seems, at least these days, you'd get separate treads at the front and rear instead of single lines of track, so it's nice to see here. His tracks are also wider than before, giving Selects Megatron an added sense of heft and stature. There's also hardly any flat surfaces on him, and the brightly colored plastic gives us a great glimpse at all the sculpted detail. Hatches, rivets, armor plating, even grenade launchers on the side of the turret picked out in bright orange. They're all here, at least they are on the front half of the tank. The back half is clearly just Megatron's legs, and the feet stick out even more than they ever did on the Siege toy, since they're the only major parts visible in this mode that are cast in gray. And the heel spurs don't even like to stay folded inside them. Between them is an errant plate sandwiched in some mold waffling that's apparently supposed to help distance Megatron from his H-tank roots, but just doesn't. I'll happily tell you now that this is the most consequential use of this accessory. Moving on to the turret, it is also beefier than on the original, though this comes at a cost, with added slanted armor plating. It can't raise or lower, but it is able to rotate about its axis and receive blast effects in the muzzle. As I did back in 2019, I love that the fusion cannon makes up its center mass, giving the impression that it's what's actually providing the firepower, and that the tank barrel just helps him hit targets further away. Between Siege and Selects, I have to say I prefer this tank mode, though most of that is due to the outrageous color scheme, but that extra chunk factor does play a major role. To see how he stacks up to tanks in the real world, Definitely Not Char is back once again as this review's alt mode expert.
Earthrise Megatron follows the long-standing tradition dating all the way back to Generation 2 of Earth mode tank Megatron transforming into some facsimile of the M1A1 Abrams main battle tank. However, like every rendition so far, this toy takes a few creative liberties. Starting from the front, we see that whatever tank crew was unfortunate enough to be assigned to Megatron, or the tank Megatron decided to take the image of, elected to mount a couple of spare track links to the upper glacis. While this is not practiced by many modern tank crews, historically this has been pretty common for a couple reasons, perhaps the most tragic of these being during the early years of mechanized warfare, armor thickness could have meant the difference between life and death, so many crews tried to get as much as they could. Just behind, we see the driver's hatch with an array of 3 periscopes. When a tank's hatches are closed like this, it is referred to as being buttoned up, and is considered to be the most limiting to situational awareness, and the most uncomfortable way to drive such a vehicle. As such, tanks are only operated like this when they are likely to be under direct fire. To the left of the driver's hatch, we see another detail which may be a little perplexing, especially since it isn't pecked out in any paint. However, I think this is meant to be some description of optic to compensate for the missing ones on top of the turret. This might lead to some issues where Megatron wouldn't be able to see where he's firing unless he was straight ahead. But since when has Megatron been the type not to stand and face his enemy? As for Megatron's lower glacis, Megatron has no lower glacis. Let's hope he knows how to go hull down, otherwise he's liable to get shot on the top of his noggin. Maybe that's why he wears the bucket. Moving to the side, we see the road wheels are picked out in silver around the edges. This is something we see on real tanks, where constant abrasion from the tracks reveals shiny metal below. At the rear, we see that the designers made an attempt to represent the engine block of the tank, with vents for the jet turbine engines that power the M1 Abrams. However, when viewed from any angle besides directly above, the effort rings somewhat hollow. Directing our attention to the turret, we see that the barrel of Megatron's main gun features a bore evacuator and apparent rifling. One could argue that the rifling is inaccurate due to the fact that the Abrams' main gun is a smoothbore. However, I think it's a neat detail nonetheless. On the side of the turrets, we find smoke canister launchers, which in my opinion come off as a bit of an afterthought due to how flat they are. When we look at the back of the turret, we see this large protrusion. If I wanted to be creative, I would tell you that this implies that Megatron's main gun is actually a massive recoilless rifle, and this is the exhaust. However, this is pretty obviously the rear of Megatron's fusion cannon. If I wanted to judge this tank mode as an accurate representation of an M1 Abrams, then this figure would come up short. However, that is clearly not the goal of this alt mode. The overall silhouette is reminiscent of said tank, but much like the Deco's G2 inspiration, this tank has taken artistic liberties with the sculpt to differentiate itself from the genuine article, while keeping the design relatively grounded, with a few concessions made for the robot mode and wanting to reuse the engineering from Siege Megatron.
We're skipping ahead to robot mode, as Selects Megatron's transformation is hardly changed from the original, save for the placement of a few locking tabs. Ignoring the color scheme for now, it's plain to see that there's been a stark change in Megatron's robot mode since he left Cybertron, though I suppose the complete palette swap only helps accentuate that. Selects Megatron here is aiming closer to the specific shapes and stylings of his original Sunbow show model, retooling his head, torso, waist, and shins. Because of the far more sudden transition between his chest and abdomen than that found on Siege, this toy ends up looking a fair deal leaner than that figure. This effect is helped along by his squished helmet and larger face, the latter of which features some blazing painted orange eyes. It's always nice to see safety orange, isn't it? Megatron's new abdomen has some exquisite gunmetal grating, but even with all this, he still ends up feeling a bit naked. His purple camo only does so much when it comes to breaking up these great flat surfaces on his chest and shins, the latter of which are probably the largest uninterrupted flat surfaces in the whole War for Cybertron trilogy. He needs a faction symbol or some more safety orange accents or something to keep him interesting. There's just an inarticulable impression upon me that he's wearing pajamas, though that feeling is nowhere near as stark as it is on the Legacy Core version, thank God. Even so, I still think he looks mean and powerful enough to lead the Decepticons. No amount of garish 90s gratuity can dilute his dastardly demeanor. No Emperor of Destruction is complete without his own personal arsenal. Megatron's signature weapon is his fusion cannon, retooled for his Earthrise release to mimic the original Generation 1 weapon. I'd have one to compare, but with how the sanctions are going recently, it's been difficult for my handlers in the Carbombian government to procure one for me, so you'll just have to take my word for it. It fits pretty loosely, too. His other weapon? Well, it's sort of a pike or lance, I suppose, just with a really long blade, and he can't even hold it by the actual handle. It's like a worse version of United Megatron's accessory, since you can only really mount it on his arm and use it as either a sword or a spare cannon. The blade is based on that which came with the Japanese release of G1 Megatron, but so is Siege's, and that one was leaps and bounds better than this one. A chunk of sloped armor is just tacked on with nowhere to go, cluttering up the place when it probably would have looked cool added to Megatron's shoulders. The parts-forming plate from vehicle mode can come back as a buckler of sorts in theory, but the peg is just too short to be usable on his arms. It can only really store on the pike, with a divot cut out for the tank barrel. These accessories are easily the weakest aspect of the Earthrise remold, as they feel like a shoehorned afterthought just to get Megatron to fit the Earth aesthetic, and just aren't any fun at all. There's no extra value here, just disappointment. This remold is fortunate that it got such a sought-after redeco, as otherwise I think it'd have been forgotten completely. Earthrise Megatron seems like a minor downgrade compared to his Siege debut, as while the remastered tank mode is freaking sweet, the lack of thought put into his accessories really drag him down in my eyes. Barring that, this toy is a fine enough Megatron, and the G2 colors of the Selects release do more than a fair bit to differentiate him from the original. Just get him cheap if you can help it, especially if you already own another version of this mold. Lord knows there's plenty out there. Thankfully for his sake, the big stain on his reputation that are his accessories doesn't stir any type of strong emotion out of me, so I think adequate is a safe enough accolade for him. But what do you think? As always, let me know what you think in the comments, or tell me to my face by joining the Cruved Kit Discord server, linked in the description. Be sure to subscribe for more reviews like this, as next time we'll be rounding out the Generation 2 trifecta. This has been Kit Katastrophe. Transform and roll out.